The desert doesn't keep secrets. It bleaches them into bone and scatters them with the wind. For a young Navajo woman named Yaji, who spoke more to the spirits of the canyon than to people, the desert was a scroll of silent stories. She knew the language of the heat-haze and the cold shadows, but one scorching afternoon, the desert offered her a story written in the blood. A dying white man collapsed at the foot of a sacred mesa. Her grandmother had warned her of his kind, their promises as hollow as a dried gourd. But in his fading eyes, she saw not a threat, but a life unraveling. A life she chose to save. That single act of mercy would be the spark that ignited a firestorm, for by sunrise, the man's world, a world of gunpowder and greed, would come crashing down upon her door. Heat radiated from the sandstone in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon into a drunken wobble. Yazi moved through this world, not as a conqueror, but as a component, another piece of the vast sun-baked puzzle of the Arizona territory. Her name meant "little one" in the Diné language, and she had worn the name like a second skin, her movements, quiet her voice, a rare murmur, her eyes cast downward in the presence of others. She lived with her grandmother Nijoni in a traditional hogan nestled in a crease of the earth, its packed mud walls a constant cool comfort against the tyranny of the sun. Their world was one of Herb's stories, and the cyclical rhythm of the seasons, a world far removed from the bustling, noisy settlements of the white men that were springing up like bitter weeds across the land. On this day, she was searching for cliff rose, its bark essential for crafting the soft, durable sandals they wore. Her fingers, stained with the earth, traced the familiar contours of the rock as she moved along the base of a towering mesa, its face a canvas of deep reds and burnt oranges. A raven, her constant companion in these lonely excursions, circled high above its croaking call, a familiar punctuation in the profound silence. Suddenly, the raven's call changed, sharpening into a series of frantic, guttural cries. It dove low, circling a spot hidden from Yazi's view by a thicket of saltbush. Yazi's heart fluttered, a wild bird caught in her chest. Her first instinct, born of a lifetime of caution, was to retreat. The desert was full of dangers, rattlesnakes, flash floods, and the two-legged predators her grandmother spoke of with a deep ancestral fear. But the raven's persistence was a hook in her curiosity. She trusted the bird's wisdom. Moving with a silence that was second nature, she crept toward the saltbush, her moccasins making no sound on the sandy soil. She peered through the thorny branches. What she saw made the breath catch in her throat. Sprawled on the ground was a man, a white man, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His clothes were dark with sweat, and something darker still. A large, ugly stain spread across his side, the color of wet rust. His face, bearded and gaunt, was turned toward the sky, his lips cracked and blackened by dehydration. A fly buzzed lazily around his half-open mouth. He was dying. Every fiber of her being, every warning from Nijoni screamed at her to run. He was the embodiment of the world that had pushed her people to the fringes, a world of metal and noise that had no respect for the sacredness of this land. He was an omen, a disruption to the harmony she cherished. She took a step back, the sand crunching beneath her heel. The sound, small as it was, reached him. His eyelids fluttered. Pale blue eyes clouded with pain, and the haze of impending death struggled to focus on her. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony that cut through Yazi's fear and struck a chord of simple, unadorned humanity. He was not an idea or an omen. He was a man in his final desperate moments. She looked at his hands. They were calloused and scarred, but they weren't clutching a weapon. A canteen lay a few feet away, bone dry. A horse was nowhere in sight. He was alone, abandoned to the sun and the scavengers. The raven landed on a rock nearby, its head cocked, watching her. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for her decision. To walk away was to be safe. To walk away was to obey the wisdom of her ancestors. But to walk away was also to leave a soul to be devoured by the indifferent heat. Could she live with that silence? Could she listen to the wind again, and not hear that groan? With a resolve that surprised even herself, Yaji pushed through the salt bush. The man flinched as her shadow fell over him. She knelt, her shyness a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't speak. She didn't know the words, and even if she did, they would have caught in her throat. Instead, she acted. She uncorked her own small canteen, the water within more precious than gold. Supporting his head with a trembling hand, she gently poured a few drops onto his cracked lips. He coughed, then drank with a desperate rasping thirst. She let him have only a little, knowing too much, too fast, could harm him. His eyes cleared for a moment. "Who?" He rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. Yazi simply shook her head, pulling back. Her gaze fell to his wound. The cloth of his shirt was stiff with dried blood, but a sluggish, dark seepage indicated it was still bleeding. It was a gunshot wound, high on his side, angry and inflamed. Without medicine, the fever would consume him before the night was through. The decision was no longer simply about giving a dying man water. It was about carrying the full weight of his life back to her home, to the sanctuary she shared with her grandmother. It was an act that could unravel their peaceful existence, inviting a world of trouble into their lives. The man was a scout, his buckskin clothing and the worn pistol belt still strapped to his waist told her that. And scouts did not travel alone. She looked up at the vast, indifferent sky, then back at the man's face, now slack with unconsciousness. She had made her choice the moment she poured the water. Now she had to bear its consequences. With a strength born of necessity, she began the arduous task of saving the life of Silas Coulter, a man whose name she didn't yet know, and whose world was about to collide with hers with the force of a desert thunderstorm. Dragging Silas Coulter was a monumental effort. He was not a large man, but he was a dead weight of muscle and bone, and Yazi was slender built for endurance rather than raw strength. She fashioned a crude travois from 2 sturdy branches and strips of leather from her pouch, a technique learned from Nijoni for hauling firewood. Even with this, every yard was a battle against the sucking sand and the oppressive heat. The sun beat down, and sweat stung her eyes, but she pressed on her jaw set in a determined line. Nijoni was outside the hogan grinding corn on a stone metate when she saw her granddaughter approaching, dragging the strange burden. The old woman's eyes deep-set and sharp as a hawk's narrowed. She rose with a surprising swiftness for her age, her face a mask of stern disapproval. "Yaji, what is this you bring to our door?" Her voice was low, but carried the weight of generations. "You bring a snake into our home." "He was dying," Shimasani Yaji whispered, her voice hoarse from exertion. "The spirits would not have guided me to him if I was meant to leave him." Nijoni looked at the unconscious man, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. She saw the gun, the pale skin, the symbol of a long and painful history. But she also saw the state he was in, the way death clung to him like a second shadow. Her pragmatism warred with her prejudice. An unburied body attracted predators both animal and human. And perhaps her granddaughter was right. The spirits worked in inscrutable ways. "Bring him inside," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. But his trouble is now our trouble. Do not forget that. Inside the cool, dim interior of the hogan, they laid him on a sheepskin pallet. The circular room was sparse and clean, the smoke hole in the center of the roof allowing a single column of light to illuminate the swirling dust motes. While Nijoni boiled water over the central fire pit, Yazi carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric from his wound. The bullet had gone clean through a blessing in its own right, but the flesh was torn and livid. Infection was already setting in the skin around the entry, and exit wounds a purplish red. Yazi worked with a focused intensity, her earlier shyness replaced by a clinical competence. She cleaned the wound with a boiled cloth, her touch gentle but firm. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. The fever was climbing. Nijoni returned with a poultice of ground juniper and a bitter-smelling root she called snake tongue. "This will draw out the poison," she said, her voice softer now. But the fever is a battle he must fight in his own spirit. They packed the poultice into the wounds and bound them with clean strips of cloth. For the rest of the day and deep into the night, they took turns bathing his forehead with cool water and trying to get him to drink a willow bark tea to fight the fever. He thrashed in his delirium, his body slick with sweat, his mind lost in a fractured landscape of memory and pain. It was in these fevered ramblings that Yazi began to piece together fragments of his story. He cried out names, disjointed phrases that meant nothing to her, yet held a desperate urgency. Corbin, the map. No. He moaned, his head thrashing from side to side. Not the cattle. It was never. The spring. My God, the spring. The words were nonsense, but a name stuck out, Corbin. He repeated it often, sometimes in anger, sometimes in a plea. And the word map. It seemed to hold a terrible significance for him. Later, in the deepest hours of the night, when the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the man's ragged breathing, he grew still. His eyes opened the fever, receding just enough to grant him a moment of lucidity. He looked at Yazi, who sat vigilantly by his side, her silhouette softened by the firelight. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Yazi simply nodded, her throat tight. "Silas," he said, his eyes struggling to stay focused. "My name. Silas Coulter." He tried to say more, but a spasm of pain seized him, and he sank back into the fever's embrace. But now he had a name. Silas Coulter. A name that humanized him further, yet also tethered him to the dangerous world beyond their small canyon. He wasn't just a dying man anymore. He was a person with connections with a past and with enemies who might come looking for him. As the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of grey, and Rose Yazi felt a profound sense of foreboding. She had pulled this man back from the brink, but in doing so, she felt as if she had tied a rope around their sanctuary and thrown the other end out into the wilderness, inviting whatever monsters lurked there to pull themselves in. She stepped outside the hogan into the cool pre-dawn air. The stars were beginning to fade. The desert was quiet, serene. But it was a deceptive peace. She listened, her senses honed by a lifetime of paying attention to the subtle shifts in the environment. And then she heard it. It was faint at first, a low rhythmic vibration carried on the morning breeze, felt more in the soles of her feet than heard with her ears. It was the sound of shod horses, not one or two, but several moving at a steady, purposeful pace. They were coming from the direction where she had found Silas. Her blood ran cold. The monsters had taken the rope. They were coming. Nijoni's words echoed in her mind. His trouble is now our trouble. The sun had not yet crested the horizon, but Yazi knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that their world was about to be irrevocably broken. The sound grew from a distant murmur to a distinct, rhythmic pounding. Hoofbeats. At least 4 horses, moving with the unhurried confidence of men who believed the land belonged to them. Yazi's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady advance of the riders. She ducked back inside the hogan, her eyes wide with alarm. "Shimasani," she breathed, her voice tight with fear. "They are here!" Nijoni's face, a road map of wrinkles and wisdom, settled into a stoic mask. She had seen this movie before, in many different versions over many long years. She nodded slowly, her gaze flicking to the still unconscious form of Silas Coulter. The debt for a life is always paid. "Go, you are the one who brought him here. You will be the one to speak." The command was not a punishment, but a transference of responsibility. In Nijoni's world, actions had weight, and Yazi had chosen to bear this one. Swallowing her fear, Yazi pushed aside the heavy blanket that served as a door and stepped back into the pale morning light. They were closer now, cresting the small rise that sheltered the hogan. 4 riders, dark silhouettes against the brightening sky. As they drew nearer, their features sharpened into focus. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, a man in his 40s with a severe, handsome face framed by a neatly trimmed dark beard. He wore a fine leather vest over a clean shirt, and his eyes cold and grey as a winter sky swept over the hogan, the small patch of corn, and finally settled on Yazi. He exuded an aura of absolute authority. To his right rode a younger man, wiry and restless, with a face full of ragged anger. A tangled reddish beard failed to hide a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his lips. His hand never strayed far from the butt of the pistol on his hip. On the leader's other side was an older man, weathered and tired-looking, his eyes holding a deep-seated weariness. The 4th man hung back slightly, his features obscured by the brim of his hat, his attention fixed not on Yazi, but on the ground, reading the tracks with an expert's focus. The leader halted his horse a dozen yards from where Yazi stood, a silent, solitary figure in her simple calico dress. The other men fanned out their posture, casual, but their formation a clear, intimidating enclosure. "Good morning, miss," the leader said, his voice smooth and controlled, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. It was the kind of voice that could give a pleasant greeting or a death sentence with the same even tone. "My name is Corbin Shaw. My companions and I are looking for a man, our scout. He went missing 2 days ago. We tracked his horse, then his footsteps to this place." Yazi's throat felt as if it were full of sand. She clutched her hands together to stop them from shaking, her gaze fixed on a point just past Shaw's shoulder. To meet his eyes felt like a surrender she was not willing to make. She remained silent. The angry one, Fletcher, spat a stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "She ain't gonna answer you, Corbin. She's just a dumb squaw. Let's just search the damn hovel and be done with it." "Be silent," Fletcher Shaw commanded, without looking at him. His cold eyes remained locked on Yazi. "My associate is unrefined. Please forgive him. We mean you no harm. Our man, Silas Coulter, was wounded. We're worried for his safety. Have you seen him?" The name spoken aloud by this man sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. They knew. There was no pretending ignorance. Her mind raced, searching for the right words, the right strategy. The truth felt like a weapon they could turn against her, but a lie felt flimsy and foolish. Why was he wounded? Yazi's voice was barely a whisper, a sound easily swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Corbin Shaw's eyebrows raised, slightly surprised that she had spoken, and with a question, no less. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed his features before being smoothed away. We were tracking rustlers, he explained, his tone, patient, as if speaking to a child. They ambushed him. A cowardly act. We dealt with them, but Silas was gone when we found the scene. We just want our friend back. It sounded plausible. It sounded reasonable. But Silas's fevered words echoed in her mind. Corbin, the map, not the cattle. The man you seek is not here, Yazi said, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. It was a direct lie, and it felt heavy on her tongue. Fletcher snorted in disbelief. The hell he ain't. Gideon! He barked at the tracker. What do the tracks say? The quiet tracker. Gideon finally looked up. He pushed back the brim of his hat, revealing a face as cracked and unreadable as the desert floor. He nodded toward the Hogan. He was dragged. From that bush over there, right to the door. He's in there. Fletcher's sneer widened into a triumphant, ugly grin. He swung his leg over his saddle, ready to dismount. That's it. I'm done with this game. Hold Fletcher Shaw's voice cracked like a whip. Fletcher froze his foot, hovering above the ground. Shaw's mask of civility had slipped. His eyes were no longer just cold. They were menacing. He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and powerful. He walked toward Yazi, stopping just a few feet away. She could smell the scent of leather tobacco, and something else, a faint, metallic tang of violence. Let's not be difficult, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. We know he's in there. He's our property, in a manner of speaking. We have a doctor and supplies. You have mud walls and superstition. You cannot help him. Give him to us and we will be on our way. We might even compensate you for your trouble. His offer of money was more insulting than any of Fletcher's slurs. He saw her as something to be brought her home, as something to be entered at will. A spark of defiance, small but intensely hot, ignited within her. She lifted her chin, her dark eyes, finally meeting his. He is too weak to be moved, she said, her voice clear and steady. To move him now would kill him. He stays. A stunned silence fell over the small clearing. The weary man Owen looked on with a troubled expression. Fletcher's jaw dropped in open-mouthed shock. Even the horses seemed to still. Corbin Shaw stared at her, his grey eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. He was a man accustomed to obedience, to having his will imposed upon the world. This quiet, shy Navajo girl had just drawn a line in the sand, and in doing so had challenged his entire universe. The polite facade crumbled completely, revealing the predator beneath. That Shaw said each word a chip of ice was the wrong answer. Corbin Shaw did not resort to immediate violence. His methods were more insidious. He was a patient predator, content to lay siege rather than storm the walls. With a curt nod, he instructed his men to make camp. They dismounted, a palpable air of menace settling over the clearing as they unsaddled their horses and started a small fire, a deliberate and proprietary act that claimed the land in front of the Hogan as their own. They were not leaving. The day crawled by under a blanket of suffocating tension. Yazi retreated inside the Hogan, but there was no sense of safety. The flimsy blanket door was no defense against the low murmur of their voices, the sharp crackle of their fire, or the weight of their presence. She and Nijoni moved in silence, tending to Silas, who had slipped back into a deep, fever-heavy slumber. The poultice seemed to be working. The angry redness around his wounds had lessened slightly, but his breathing was still shallow. Nijoni watched her granddaughter with worried eyes. You have chosen a dangerous path, Yaji. That man Shaw, his spirit is twisted. He does not value life. He values only what he can hold in his hand. Silas spoke. In his fever, Shimasani Yaji explained, her voice low. He spoke of a map and a spring. He said it was never about the cattle. I do not believe that man's story. A man's tongue can weave any pattern he wishes, Nijoni cautioned. Truth is found in the eyes in the spirit, and the spirit of that camp is poison. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery colors, Yazi risked a glance outside. Shaw was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and deadly. Owen, the older man, sat staring into the fire, his shoulders slumped. Gideon was gone, likely scouting the area. It was Fletcher who drew her attention. He was pacing restlessly, kicking at stones, his agitation a stark contrast to Shaw's cold calm. He seemed to be arguing with his leader. "Why are we waiting?" Corbin Fletcher's voice was a low, angry buzz. "We could have been in and out of there in 5 minutes. Take the scout and burn this mud hut to the ground." "Because, Fletcher, you have the subtlety of a charging buffalo," Shaw's reply was clipped and dismissive. "The girl is protecting him. If we go in with guns blazing, she might put a knife in his ribs out of spite or fear. He's no good to me dead. He's weak now, but he's alive. We will wait." Her resolve will crumble. Resolve, she's a child. She's a child who looked me in the eye and said no. That requires a certain kind of strength. A kind we must break, not shatter. Patience. Yazi shrank back from the doorway, her heart cold. He's no good to me dead. Shaw didn't want to save his friend. He wanted Silas alive for a reason. He needed something from him. The map. Later that evening, the fever broke. Silas woke with a shuddering gasp, his eyes clear for the first time in days. He looked around the dim hogan, at the unfamiliar curved walls, and the 2 Navajo women watching him, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "Where?" He started trying to sit up, but a sharp intake of breath and a wince of pain stopped him. "Be still," Nijoni said, her voice surprisingly gentle. She offered him a cup of water. "You have been near the spirit world. You are safe here." Silas drank, then looked at Yazi. He recognized her. You found me." Yazi nodded her shyness, returning now that he was lucid. "My name is Silas Coulter," he said again, formally this time. "I am in your debt." His gaze shifted toward the Hogan's entrance. "Are they here?" "Corbin 4 men," Yazi confirmed softly. "Their leader calls himself Corbin Shaw. They are waiting." A look of profound despair crossed Silas's face. He closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. "Then it's no use. He won't leave without me. Or without what I have." "The map," Yazi ventured. Silas's eyes snapped open, his surprise evident. "How? You spoke. In your fever." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. "So I betrayed myself even in my sleep." He looked from Yazi to Nijoni, a decision solidifying in his weary eyes. He had been shown kindness by these strangers, while the man he called a partner had left him for dead. He owed them the truth. "Corbin Shaw is not my friend," he began, his voice weak but steady. "I was his scout, yes. We were hired by cattle barons to find a new route through the pass. At least that's what I was told. But Corbin had other plans. We were on this land, sacred land your people call it, when I found something. Not a cattle trail, a hidden canyon, and in it a spring that runs year-round, a small silver deposit in the rock walls beside it." Yazi and Nijoni exchanged a look. They knew the place. It was called the Water That Emerges, a sacred place of ceremony unknown to outsiders. Water and Silver Silas continued. "In this land, that's a kingdom." Corbin knew it. He'd been using the rustler hunt as a pretense to survey this territory for the railroad illegally. He was going to register a false claim, sell the location of the spring and the silver, and become a rich man. "The map I made was the proof. He told us you were ambushed by rustlers," Yazi said. Silas shook his head, a grimace of pain on his face. There were no rustlers. When I confronted him, told him I wouldn't be part of stealing land from the Navajos, he tried to bargain. When I refused, he waited until my back was turned. He shot me. He and Fletcher. They took what they thought was the map from my saddlebag and left me for the coyotes. They must have realized later it was a decoy, a topographical sketch of the wrong area. The real map is still with me. He reached a trembling hand inside his shirt to a small oilskin pouch tied around his neck. This is what he wants. This is why he needs me alive. He thinks I'm the only one who can lead him back to the spring if the map is lost or ruined. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of cold, calculating greed. Shaw wasn't waiting out of concern for Silas's health. He was waiting to retrieve his key to a fortune that would be built on the desecration of a sacred place. Yazi looked at the pouch around Silas's neck, then at the blanket door behind which sat the man who would kill for it. The web of whispers and lies had been untangled, revealing a single venomous truth at its center. The trouble Nijoni had spoken of was no longer just at their door. It was inside, hanging around the neck of the man she had saved, and Corbin Shaw would not leave until he possessed it one way or another. Dawn of the second day arrived not with hope, but with the cold certainty of a closing trap. Shaw's patience was wearing thin, a fact made clear by the tense, angry atmosphere emanating from his camp. With Silas lucid, and the truth revealed, the dynamics inside the Hogan had shifted. It was no longer a simple matter of healing a stranger. It was now a conspiracy of 3 against the 4 men outside. Silas the Weak was determined. "We can't let him get that map," he rasped, struggling to sit up against a rolled blanket. "If he files a claim on that spring, he'll bring miners ranchers. They'll divert the water. It will destroy this whole area for your people." "He will not have it," Nijoni stated, her voice imbued with an ancient, unshakable resolve. She was no longer just a wary old woman. She was a guardian of her heritage, and the water that emerges was a part of that heritage. The flap of the Hogan was thrust aside without ceremony. Corbin Shaw stood there, framed by the morning light, his expression stripped of all pretense. He held 2 tin cups of coffee in one hand and a small sack in the other. He ignored the women and fixed his gaze on Silas. "Coulter, good to see you among the living," he said, his voice deceptively casual. He stepped inside his presence, seeming to suck the air from the small space. He offered a cup to Silas, who stared at it without moving. "No more of a tea man now, are you?" Shaw set the cups down and emptied the sack onto a blanket. Sugar cubes, a tin of coffee, a small mirror, and several shiny silver dollars tumbled out. They were offerings of a sort, but they felt like insults. He turned his attention to Yaji. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot yesterday," he said, his voice adopting a tone of strained reason. "You've shown my man a certain rustic hospitality. I want to thank you for that." He gestured to the pile of goods. "A token of my appreciation. Take it, and give me my scout. We'll trouble you no further." Yazi looked at the glittering coins, then back at Shaw's cold eyes. She saw the transaction for what it was, the price he was willing to pay for a sacred spring for her people's future. It was nothing. She shook her head. Shaw's smile was thin and dangerous. "The girl is stubborn, Silas. Perhaps you can talk some sense into her." "Leave them alone," Corbin Silas said, his voice low and full of contempt. "Your business is with me." "And so it is." Shaw took a step closer to Silas's palate. "You have something that belongs to me. A misunderstanding led to our separation, but now we can rectify that. Give me the map and we can all go home." "It was no misunderstanding," Silas shot back. You shot me in the back." Fletcher appeared at the doorway behind Shaw, a rifle held loosely in his hands. The threat was unspoken but clear. "Unfortunate but necessary," Shaw conceded with a shrug. "You developed a sudden inconvenient conscience. Now the map. Or perhaps these good women would prefer I negotiate with them. What is the price for a man's life in this barren wasteland? Surely it can be bought." He turned to Nijoni. "Old mother, you are wise. You know the way of the world. Everything has a price. Name yours." Nijoni met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes, which had seen nearly a century of struggle and survival, held no fear. "There is no price for a soul," she said, her voice clear and strong. "There is no price for the sacred water that gives us life. You offer us trinkets. You offer us the dust you wish to turn our land into. We do not want it. Now leave our home." The sheer, unadorned dignity of her refusal infuriated Shaw. His face darkened the veneer of civility, burning away to reveal raw, naked greed. "You foolish old woman," he snarled. "You think your desert spirits and your pride will protect you? I have 4 guns. You have prayers." He took another menacing step into the room, his shadow falling over Nijoni. "I am tired of this game. I will have what is mine. If I have to tear this mud hut apart, stick by stick, and slit all 3 of your throats, to find it I will." It was the threat Yaji had been waiting for, the final, inevitable escalation. And she was ready. In the long hours of the night while Shaw's men slept, she, Nijoni, and Silas had formulated a desperate plan, a strategy built not on strength, but on their intimate knowledge of the land Shaw so desperately wanted to steal. Yazi met Shaw's furious gaze. Her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but she pushed it down. She thought of the spring, the cool, clear water bubbling from the rock, the sacredness of the place. She thought of her grandmother's defiance. She was no longer just the shy girl who found a dying man. She was a defender. "You will find nothing," she said, her voice steady. Shaw laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We'll see about that." He turned to Fletcher. "Get Owen. We're tearing this place apart." But as Fletcher turned to obey, a sharp whistle cut through the air from outside, followed by Gideon's urgent shout. "Corbin riders coming a patrol, maybe. Looks like 5 of them from the west." Shaw froze his face, a mask of fury and frustration. The arrival of outsiders, especially a military patrol, would complicate everything, drawing unwanted attention to his illegal activities. He shot a look of pure venom at Silas, then at the 2 women. "This isn't over," he hissed, backing out of the Hogan. "This changes nothing." But it did change something. It gave them a window. It gave them a chance. As Shaw and his men moved to intercept the approaching riders, Nijoni looked at Yazi and nodded. The time for waiting was over. The time for escape had begun. The approaching riders were a godsend, a stroke of luck so profound it felt like an answer to a prayer Yazi hadn't dared to voice. Shaw and his men moved away from the Hogan, their attention focused on the dust cloud to the west, preparing their story. Their faces arranged into masks of concerned citizens searching for a lost friend. This was the opening Yaji, Nijoni, and Silas had planned for. Now Nijoni whispered, her voice urgent. She handed Yazi a small, tightly woven basket containing dried meat, a water skin, and medical supplies. Getting Silas out was the first, most difficult challenge. He was still weak, a dead weight on his feet. Yazi and Nijoni supported him, his arms draped over their shoulders, and half-carried, half-dragged him to the back of the Hogan. Generations of their family had lived here, and they knew secrets the earth held. A section of the packed mud wall, cleverly disguised, could be pushed outward, revealing a narrow opening, leading directly into the winding, dry arroyo behind their home. It was an escape route built for a different kind of enemy in a different time, but its purpose was the same. They slipped through the opening into the shadow of the canyon wall. The arroyo's sandy bottom and high, twisting sides would hide them from immediate view. Go-Nijoni urged, pressing a hand to Yazi's cheek. "Follow the creek bed to the place of the twin pillars. From there, you know the path through the labyrinth. The spirits of the canyon will guide your feet." "You are not coming?" Yazi asked, her heart sinking. "I am an old woman," Nijoni said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "My legs are not made for running. I will slow you down, and I will not abandon my home. I will delay them. I will tell them you took the man and fled south. Go now. Protect the water, my little one." With a final desperate look at her grandmother, Yazi turned and helped Silas stumble down the arroyo. Every step was an agony for him, his breath coming in ragged pants. They had to move quickly, but his injury set a grueling pace. The sand was deep, pulling at their feet, and the canyon walls seemed to press in on them. They didn't have much time. The patrol, if that's what it was, would either be a brief distraction or an entangling problem for sure. Either way, he would soon realize they were gone. The pursuit would be swift and ruthless. From his camp, Gideon the tracker was the first to notice something was amiss. While Shaw dealt with the newcomers, a small group of prospectors, not a patrol, who were quickly sent on their way, with a stern warning, Gideon's eyes were drawn back to the hogan. The silence was too profound. He circled the structure, his eyes scanning the ground. It didn't take him long to find the scuffed earth near the rear wall and the faint drag marks leading into the arroyo. "They're gone!" he yelled. Out the back, Shaw's face contorted with rage. His gamble on patience had failed. "Fletcher with me. We'll ride them down. Owen, Gideon, you take the ridge. They can't have gotten far. I want that map the chase was on." Yazi could hear the shouts echoing down the canyon, the sound bouncing off the rock walls and multiplying until it felt like they were surrounded. Fear spurred her onward. Silas, pale and sweating, leaned heavily on her, his determination the only thing keeping him on his feet. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "I'm slowing you down." "Save your breath for walking, Yazi," said her voice, strained. They reached the twin pillars, two towering sentinels of rock that marked the entrance to a maze of slot canyons, a place the Bilagana called the Labyrinth. It was a treacherous network of narrow passages, some only a few feet wide, with sheer sculpted walls that rose hundreds of feet. Yazi knew these canyons like the lines on her own hand. She had played in them as a child, learning their twists, their dead ends, their secret passages. This was her ground. They plunged into the shadows of the first narrow passage. The air grew instantly cooler. The sounds of pursuit became muffled and distorted. But they were followed. Gideon was too good a tracker. Yazi knew he would not be fooled for long. Looking up, she saw them, Owen and Gideon, on the canyon rim, moving along the edge, trying to spot them from above. Shaw and Fletcher would be at the entrance, coming after them on foot. They were being squeezed from both sides. "This way," Yazi whispered, pulling Silas into an even narrower side canyon, one that seemed to be a dead end. The rock walls closed in until they could touch both sides at once. At the end, a pile of fallen rocks blocked the path. "It's a trap," Silas breathed, slumping against the wall. Yazi put a finger to her lips. She began to climb the rockfall, finding handholds and footholds that were nearly invisible. It wasn't a dead end. It was a doorway. At the top was a small opening, a rock window, that led into an adjacent parallel canyon. It was a difficult climb for her. For an injured man, it was nearly impossible. With a surge of adrenaline, she pulled and he pushed, and somehow Silas scrambled through the opening, collapsing in a heap on the other side. They heard Shaw and Fletcher enter the passage they had just left. "They're trapped. End of the line for you." Coulter Fletcher's voice echoed triumphantly. Yazi and Silas lay still, their breathing silenced as the men searched the dead end, their curses of frustration echoing when they found nothing. They had bought themselves a few more precious minutes. They continued their desperate flight, Yazi's knowledge of the terrain their only weapon. She led Silas through passages over rock falls and along narrow ledges. But their pursuers were relentless. Soon they could hear footsteps behind them again, closer this time. They emerged into a slightly wider section of the canyon, where a steep, treacherous slope of loose shale and scree led up to the rim. It was their only way out. As they began the slow, agonizing climb, a shot rang out and a chip of rock exploded near Yazi's head. Below them stood Corbin Shaw and Fletcher. Nowhere left to run, Shaw yelled, raising his pistol again. Another figure appeared on the rim above them. It was Owen. He had his rifle raised, but it wasn't pointed at Yazi or Silas. It was pointed down at his companions. That's enough, Corbin Owen's voice was weary but firm. This has gone too far. We were hunting rustlers, not killing for a piece of paper. Shaw looked up his face, a mask of disbelief. Don't be a fool, Owen. There's a fortune at stake. I'll have no part of it, Owen said. Or any more of your murders. Drop your weapon. Fletcher, ever the hothead, made his choice. He spun, raising his rifle toward Owen. Traitor! He screamed. But Owen was ready. His rifle cracked the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Fletcher was thrown backward, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. He slid down the rock face and lay still. Shaw, momentarily stunned by the betrayal, reacted with cold fury. He didn't fire at Owen. He turned his pistol back toward the easier target, Silas, who was exposed on the slope. But Yazi was faster. She had been watching not the men, but the rocks above them. She knew this slope. It was unstable, held in a delicate balance. With a desperate cry, she shoved a large, precariously balanced boulder at the top of the shale slide. It was enough. The boulder rolled, gathering speed, dislodging others. The entire slope of scree began to move, first slowly, then with a terrifying roar. It was not a massive landslide, but a cascade of rock and gravel, a river of stone pouring down into the canyon floor. Shaw fired one last wild shot before being engulfed. He was not crushed, but swept off his feet, carried down by the tide of shifting rock, his body battered and twisted against the canyon wall before being partially buried. A cloud of red dust filled the air, followed by an eerie silence. Panting, bleeding, and exhausted, Yazi and Silas reached the top of the rim, where Owen waited, his face grim. Below them, one man was dead, and another was broken and buried by the very land he had sought to conquer. The canyon had delivered its own final judgment. The journey back was slow and somber. Owen, his face etched with a mixture of grim resolve and regret, helped Silas while Yazi walked slightly ahead, her eyes scanning the familiar horizon. The desert seemed quieter, as if holding its breath after the violence that had scarred its canyons. When they reached the rise overlooking the Hogan, they saw Nijoni standing outside, a lone, resilient figure waiting for their return. Relief washed over Yazi, a wave so powerful it almost buckled her knees. Her grandmother was safe. There were no joyful reunions, only a quiet, profound understanding. Nijoni's gaze met Owen's, and a silent acknowledgement passed between them. He was a man who had made a choice, however late, to stand on the right side of his own conscience. He helped them get Silas back inside, laying him gently on the pallet. Corbin Shaw's leg is broken, maybe his back too. Owen reported, his voice flat. He's alive, but he won't be going anywhere. I'll ride to Fort Defiance. I'll tell them I was tracking a wanted man, a killer named Shaw, and that his accomplice Fletcher resisted arrest. I'll tell them he's waiting for them in the canyon. He looked at Silas. You were his captive, a scout he forced to guide him. That's the story. It was a clean story, a simple one that absolved everyone who deserved it and condemned the one who had earned it. And Gideon Silas asked. He saw what happened. He just disappeared. Melted back into the desert. He was a tracker, not a killer. I don't think we'll see him again. Owen didn't stay long. He took a water skin, nodded once to Yazi and Njoni, and left a man riding toward a new future, leaving his old one shattered in the canyon behind him. In the days that followed, a gentle quiet settled back over the Hogan. Yazi tended to Silas's wounds, which were now healing cleanly. The violence and fear began to recede, replaced by a comfortable silence between them. He watched her as she worked her movements deft and sure, and he saw not a shy girl, but a woman of immense strength and quiet courage. She had saved his life not once, but 3 times over. When he was strong enough to travel, he knew he had to leave. His world was not her world, and to stay would only bring more danger to her door. On his last morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the land, he sat with her outside the Hogan. I can never repay you, Yazi, he said, his voice thick with emotion. There is no debt, she replied softly, not looking at him, but at the mesas she called home. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the oilskin pouch. He held it out to her. This belongs to you, to your people. Protect it. It's the only thing of value I have to give. Yazi looked at the map, the small piece of paper that had caused so much bloodshed. Then she looked at the fire pit. Without a word, she took the pouch, walked to the fire, and dropped it into the glowing embers. It curled, blackened, and turned to ash. Silas stared, shocked. Why, we do not need a paper map to know our own home, she said, her meaning clear. The land was not a thing to be owned, charted, and sold. It was a part of them, its map, written in their hearts, and in the stories of their ancestors. He understood. He smiled a genuine sad smile. Of course. He stood up, ready to leave. He had a horse, one of Shaw's that Owen had left behind. Will you be safe? This is my home, she said, and it was the only answer needed. He mounted the horse, looking down at her one last time. In the bright morning light, she stood tall and straight, the wind gently teasing a strand of her long, dark hair. The shy girl who had hidden from the world was gone. In her place stood a guardian, a woman who had faced down death and greed, and had won not with a gun, but with courage, and a deep, unshakable connection to the world around her. She had found her voice, not in words, but in action. As Silas Coulter rode away, he knew he would carry her story with him for the rest of his days, and Yazi the little one remained. She was no longer just a listener to the desert's silent stories. Now she was the teller of one. She had a new story to pass down, a story of a dying scout, a devil at the door, and a dawn that brought not fear, but the promise of a strength she never knew she had. And so the story of Yazi and the dying scout comes to a close. It's a tale that reminds us that true strength isn't always found in the loudest voice or the quickest draw. Sometimes it's in the quiet resolve of a young woman standing up for her home. It's about the unexpected courage that can bloom in the harshest of deserts, and the unlikely bonds forged in the crucible of survival. Yazi's world was threatened by greed and violence, but she answered with wisdom, knowledge of her land, and a bravery that changed her forever. She teaches us that our heritage, our connection to our home, is a power far greater than any map or any gun. What did you think of Yazi's incredible transformation? Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had when everything was on the line? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of the Old West resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a good tale of courage, and be sure to subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of history. Thanks for listening.